All right, so today we're going to be diving into the world of legal reasoning, how judges interpret the law and try to make it all uh, make sense.
Yeah.
We've got this Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy's entry on interpretation and coherence in legal reasoning
Right.
as our guide. And let me tell you, it gets fascinating fast.
We often think about law as just like a set of rules, but it's
Yeah.
way more complex than that. It's like a
Well, yeah.
living, breathing thing that's constantly being interpreted and reinterpreted.
Okay, so right off the bat, we're already in tricky territory.
Hmm.
I mean, if the law isn't just black and white, how do judges even begin to reason with it?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah, right.
And that's where legal philosophers have been battling it out for ages.
Really?
Some, like Ronald Dworkin,
Okay.
believe judges only interpret existing law.
Hmm.
They're like detectives piecing together clues to uncover the one right answer hidden within the legal code.
But hold on, isn't that a bit idealistic? Laws are made by real people with their own biases and agendas.
Right.
How can we expect perfect consistency or a single right answer to always exist?
You're hitting on a key point of contention.
Yeah.
Other legal theorists, like Hart and Raz,
Yeah.
argue that judges sometimes have to go beyond just interpreting. They might need to fill gaps,
Right.
resolve ambiguities,
Yeah.
or even make new law when existing law falls short.
Okay.
Think of them as chefs adding their own spice to the recipe to make it work.
So it's like a balancing act between staying true to the original recipe and
Exactly.
making sure the dish actually tastes good in the modern world.
That tension is at the heart of legal interpretation.
Uh-huh.
It's a two-faced God demanding both fidelity to existing law and the ability to adapt it to new situations.
Okay. I'm already seeing how much is going on behind the scenes when a judge makes a decision.
Yeah.
It's not just about applying the rules. It's about understanding their deeper purpose and making sure they work in a coherent way.
Precisely. Right. And that brings us to another fascinating debate.
Okay.
What are judges even interpreting in the first place?
Mm-hmm.
Is it the actual words on the page?
Okay.
The intentions of those who wrote them?
Right.
Or something broader, like the values and principles underlying the whole legal system?
So, like, does the Constitution have a fixed meaning? Or does it evolve as our understanding of society changes?
That's the crux of it.
Yeah.
And this is where guys like Stanley Fish and Owen Fisk come in.
All right.
Fish argued that meaning isn't inherent in the text itself,
Okay.
but rather created by the interpretive community.
Hmm.
Fisk, on the other hand, believed that while interpretation is essential,
Okay.
it's constrained by the text and its historical context.
Wait, so if meaning is fluid, how can we ever have a stable legal system? Doesn't that lead to chaos?
That's a valid concern,
Yeah.
and it highlights the importance of the second key concept in our deep dive,
Right.
coherence.
Okay.
It's the idea that judges shouldn't just interpret laws in isolation, but rather try to make them fit together into a consistent and meaningful whole.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all connects.
Right.
So it's not enough for a judge to just find a technically correct interpretation of a single law.
Right.
They also need to consider how that interpretation fits within the bigger picture of the legal system. Right.
Precisely.
Okay.
Think of legal precedents like puzzle pieces.
Mm-hmm.
Coherence is about fitting them together in a way that makes the overall picture clear, logical, and just.
But what happens when some pieces don't quite fit or when there are multiple ways to arrange them?
That's where things get really interesting.
Oh, boy.
And that's where we'll pick up in part 2,
Okay.
where we'll explore different approaches to coherence and how they play out in real-world legal battles.
Sounds good.
All right.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, so we're back and ready to tackle this whole idea of coherence in legal reasoning. So we've got all these puzzle pieces. Laws, precedents, values.
Yeah.
But how do we make sure they all fit together in a way that makes sense?
It was one of the biggest challenges
Yeah.
in legal theory.
Hmm.
And, just like with interpreting individual laws, there are different schools of thought
Okay.
on how to achieve coherence.
So it's not as simple as just saying everything needs to be like logical and consistent.
Not quite.
Okay.
Some theorists, like Joseph Raz,
Okay.
argue for like a local approach to coherence.
Hmm.
It's like saying, let's just make sure things are consistent within specific areas of law.
Right.
But we don't necessarily need a grand unified theory of the entire legal system.
Okay, so kind of like making sure all the pieces within a certain section of the puzzle fit together, even if the whole picture isn't complete yet.
Exactly.
Okay.
This emphasis on local coherence
Yeah.
often goes hand in hand with a strong respect for precedent.
Hmm.
The idea is if judges just stick to previous rulings within a particular area of law, it creates predictability and stability.
That makes sense. But what about when those precedents conflict? Or when a judge thinks a past ruling was just plain wrong?
That's where things get tricky.
Yeah.
And it's where Raz starts to question how much weight coherence should really carry.
Okay.
He argues that sometimes other values like morality or justice
Right.
might trump the need for strict consistency.
So it's like saying, hey, if sticking to precedent leads to an unjust outcome,
Right.
maybe it's time to shake things up a bit.
Precisely.
Okay.
He's not saying judges should ignore precedent,
Right.
but rather that they need to weigh it against other important considerations. It's a judgment call, and a tough one at that.
Now, I remember you mentioned another thinker
Yeah.
who had some strong opinions about coherence, Ronald Dworkin. He seemed to be more in the grand unified theory camp, right?
Absolutely. Dworkin's idea of law as integrity
Okay.
is probably the most ambitious attempt
Really?
to achieve coherence
Okay.
in the legal system. He argued that judges should interpret the law
Right.
as though it were written by a single, morally consistent author.
Wait, hold on. Isn't that a bit of a stretch?
Wow.
I mean, laws are created by all sorts of people over long periods of time,
Right?
often with conflicting goals and values.
Yeah.
It's not like one person just sat down and wrote the entire legal code from scratch.
You're right to be skeptical. That's a common criticism
Yeah.
of Dworkin's theory. Critics argue that this single author idea is a fictional construct, a convenient but ultimately misleading way to view the messy reality of lawmaking.
So it's like pretending all those puzzle pieces were designed by the same person,
Yeah.
even though we know that's not really true.
Right.
I can see how that would make things seem more coherent on the surface, but maybe at the expense of accuracy or nuance.
Exactly. And it leads to another critique,
Okay.
that Dworkin's theory is too idealistic. It assumes a level of moral consistency and purposefulness in the legal system that
Right.
might not actually exist.
Because if different lawmakers have different values and priorities,
Uh-huh.
how can we expect the law to always speak with a single unified voice?
Precisely. Dworkin's critics argue that he downplays the role of politics compromise
Yeah.
and even outright disagreement in the lawmaking process.
Right.
They say his theory is more of an aspirational model than an accurate reflection
Okay.
of how the legal system actually works.
But hey, maybe a little idealism isn't such a bad thing, right?
Sure.
Even if Dworkin's vision is a bit utopian,
Uh-huh.
it gives us something to strive for. A legal system that's not just consistent, but also deeply rooted in moral principles.
I agree. And even critics acknowledge the value
Yeah.
of Dworkin's emphasis on coherence.
Okay.
It reminds us that the law isn't just a random collection of rules.
Right.
It should strive for integrity and reflect a deeper sense of purpose.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about coherence in the abstract. but
Right.
I'm curious, how do these different approaches actually play out in real-life legal cases?
Yeah.
Can you give us an example?
Absolutely.
Oh.
Let's look at the debate over originalism in UF constitutional interpretation.
Okay.
The idea that judges should be bound by the Constitution's original meaning,
Right.
as intended by its framers.
Ah, yes, the what would the founding fathers do approach.
Exactly.
But as we discussed earlier, critics argue that it's like trying to understand Shakespeare with a 16th century dictionary.
Right.
Times change, and so does the meaning of language.
Precisely.
Okay.
And this is where the tension between original intent and the need for coherence comes into play.
Right.
Originalists emphasize fidelity to the text and historical context, while critics point out that rigidly adhering to the framers' intent
Yeah.
can lead to absurd or unjust outcomes, especially when dealing with issues they couldn't have possibly foreseen.
Like the framers probably didn't have much to say about the internet or artificial intelligence. Trying to apply their original intent to those issues seems all a little ridiculous.
Exactly. And that's where coherence comes in.
Okay.
Even those who aren't strict originalists
Right.
recognize the need for some level of consistency and logic in constitutional interpretation.
Yeah.
They argue that the Constitution is a living document
Okay.
that needs to be interpreted in light of contemporary values and challenges,
Right.
while still maintaining a sense of fidelity to its core principles.
So it's like those mosaic restorers again. They have to be faithful to the original design, but also make sure the mosaic still looks good and makes sense in a modern setting.
A great analogy.
Yeah.
And this balancing act is constantly being debated in courts across the country.
Okay. I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together.
Good.
But we've only got one part left in our deep dive.
Right.
What else do we need to explore to really understand how judges make decisions?
Well, welcome back for the final part of our deep dive into legal reasoning.
Yeah, it's been quite a ride
It has been a ride.
through some fascinating stuff. We've seen how judges grapple with interpreting laws, striving for coherence, and even occasionally wrestling with whether to break from precedent.
It's been a whirlwind tour through some of the most fundamental questions in legal theory.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what's become clear is that this isn't just like an academic exercise, for philosophers.
Right.
It has real-world consequences for how our legal system functions.
Yeah,
And ultimately for how justice is served.
you're right. We've talked about how judges have to balance all these different approaches, but it seems like they're not operating in a vacuum.
Right?
There are other players involved, like lawmakers,
Absolutely.
who have their own roles to play in shaping the legal landscape.
We touched on this earlier when discussing Raz's views on coherence.
Right.
He makes a distinction between the roles of judges and lawmakers,
Right.
which is crucial for understanding how legal systems evolve.
Okay, so remind me, how does Raz see that distinction?
Well, he argues that judges have a primary responsibility to maintain consistency with existing law, to ensure that the system operates predictably and fairly.
Right.
They're bound by precedent and a duty to uphold the rule of law as it currently stands.
So they're like the guardians of the legal order, making sure everyone's playing by the same rules.
A great way to put it.
Okay.
Lawmakers, on the other hand, have more freedom to enact sweeping changes.
Right.
They're elected to represent the will of the people and can introduce new legislation
Yeah.
to address societal needs
Uh-huh.
or correct injustices that the existing law fails to address.
So it's like a delicate dance. Judges interpreting and applying the lawmakers, creating and revising it.
Exactly.
Each playing their part in keeping the system functioning and adapting to the times.
And this interplay between judicial and legislative power is a cornerstone of any democratic society.
Right.
It ensures that the law remains relevant and responsive to the changing needs of the people that it governs.
Okay, so we've explored these different roles, but let's zoom out for a minute. If we had to boil it all down, what are the key takeaways from this deep dive?
Yeah.
What should our listeners really remember?
I'd say the most important takeaway is that legal reasoning is far more complex than simply applying a set of rules to a set of facts.
Right.
It's a nuanced process that involves interpretation judgment, a striving for coherence,
Uh-huh.
and even a willingness to grapple with the ethical implications of different decisions.
It's not just about finding the right answer in some legal encyclopedia. It's about understanding the deeper purpose of the law,
Right.
its history, its potential impact on society, and then making a decision that fits within that complex framework. No easy feat.
Another crucial point is that there often isn't a single right answer
Right.
in legal cases.
Yeah.
Different judges, using different interpretive approaches,
Uh-huh.
can arrive at different conclusions,
Yeah.
even when looking at the same set of facts and precedents.
Right.
That can be frustrating
Yeah.
for those seeking absolute certainty.
Mm-hmm.
But it also reflects the dynamic nature of the law itself.
I'm starting to see that the diversity of perspectives and interpretations is actually a strength of the legal system.
Absolutely.
It allows for debate, evolution, and ultimately a more nuanced and responsive understanding of the law.
Right.
It keeps the conversation going.
And it underscores the importance of staying informed and engaged
Yeah.
with the legal issues that shape our world.
Right.
It's not just about lawyers and judges.
Right.
It's about all of us.
This deep dive has definitely opened my eyes to the complexities of legal reasoning.
Great.
I feel like I have a much better grasp of how the legal system works,
Good.
the challenges judges face, the importance of ongoing debate and interpretation.
I'm thrilled to hear that. And remember, we've only just scratched the surface.
Right.
There's a wealth of information out there.
Oh, yeah.
Books, articles, court decisions.
Uh-huh.
For those who want to delve even deeper
Right.
into these fascinating questions.
Yeah. And for our listeners, I encourage you to keep exploring.
Yes.
The next time you hear about a court case,
Yeah.
don't just think about the facts.
Right.
Ask yourself, what are the interpretive battles going on behind the scenes? Are the judges emphasizing authority, purpose, or coherence? What values are they balancing? And what does that tell us about the kind of legal system we live in?
Those are the questions that keep the wheels of justice turning.
Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into legal reasoning.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And until next time, stay curious.